Greetings ladies and gentlefish, and it's time for another tank review. This time we are looking at the German Tier 6 tank destroyer, the Nashorn, or Rhino/Rhinoceros. As ever, just going to start off with a little bit of history for those of you who are interested in it. This is actually one of the most faithfully historical machines in the game. This was conceived in about 1942. It was never supposed to be a permanent machine in the Wehrmacht, but the Germans had been noticing that Allied armour had been increasing in durability, bearing in mind 1942, 1942, 1943, 1944. It's around about the time that some of the up-armoured Shermans start to rear their ugly heads, and you have tanks like the IS, the Joseph Stalin for the Soviets coming about, and of course towards the end of the war you have the Pershings, the Comet turns up of course for the British, and subsequently the Centurion, though that doesn't really get its hands dirty in the Second World War itself. So the idea here was that the Germans took a very lightly armoured chassis and plonked a dirty great big gun on the top. This is the essence of a tank destroyer, essentially. In most cases, or in many cases, they were not designed from the ground up as a tank destroyer. It was just a way of getting a big gun onto the battlefield before a fully fledged tank had been designed to use that weapon system. So in this case, the chassis here is shared with the Hummel self-propelled gun. You have a light superstructure put on top, and the L71 88mm gun poking out of it. Now the L71, this is the same 88mm gun that's found on the Tiger II, the Ferdinand, some Jagdtigers, and it's one of the largest guns to see service in the Second World War. It's actually the largest, let's say, quote-unquote, mass-produced gun that the Germans used during the Second World War. The Jagdtiger, of course, had the 128mm, but that wasn't available in particularly high numbers. So, this thing was actually considered to be so effective that from its conception in 1942 it stayed in production until the end of the war. And that was mainly due to the fact that A, it was easy to produce, because it was just an already existing light chassis with some extra bits slapped on top. B, it was cheap to produce, because it was an already existing chassis with some extra bits slapped on top. And C, it was effective. This 88mm gun was capable of taking out any Allied tank of the time from a very long way away. This thing could go through the front of an IS from 2 kilometers, with a maximum range on the gun of about 13 kilometers. The gun also had a very high shell velocity, which made it easier for the gunners to aim their shots. They didn't have to account for shell drop as much, and leading your target was somewhat easier. So this was considered overall to be a very effective machine, and I think it was around about 500 of them ended up being produced, though I could of course be slightly wrong about that. Interestingly, it was originally called the Hornis, I'm probably mispronouncing that, or Hornet, but later had its name changed to the Nashorn, or Rhinoceros. So that's where the machine fits in historically. What is it that we have in the game? Well, as I said, this, as far as machines go in World of Tanks, this is actually one of the most historically faithful tanks in the game. You have a very, very lightly armoured chassis here. It's the same chassis as the Hummel, as I said, with the L71 88mm gun poking at the top. And it's a tier 6. That's essentially what it is. We could spend ages talking about it, but that is it in essence. A punchy gun on a slightly dodgy chassis. But nonetheless, that would make for a rather short tank review. So let's just have a look at where this thing fits into the tech tree. The Germans have 2 tank destroyer lines, of course. Well, or for those who don't know, they have 2 tank destroyer lines. You have got the original German TD line, which culminates up here in the Jagdpanzer E100, and then the second German TD line, which used to finish off with the What the Feck Auf E100, the tier 10 waffle thrower. But even Wargaming eventually came to their senses and decided that putting that machine in the game was a stupid idea, and they replaced it with the Grilla 15. So this machine is on the second of those tank destroyer lines. and it is in direct competition with the Jagdpanzer IV, which is the original German Tier 6 tank destroyer. And if we consider the premium machine as well, we've got the Dickermax here as the premium German Tier 6 TD. So you start off down here, work your way up the German tank destroyers, and this is one of those lines that gets into what it does right at Tier 2. So you of course have the LOL Tractor at Tier 1, then the Panzerjäger 1 at Tier 2, Marder 2 at Tier 3, Marder 38T at Tier 4, and then up here to the Panzer Soufflé 4C at Tier 5. I do also have a review of that on my channel, and actually a review of the Marder 38T if you're interested. And then you get to the Nashorn itself. And when you get here, what sort of grind are you looking at? Well, the top gun from the Panzer SFL 4C unfortunately is unique to that tank, so you don't get this gun carry over. So you have got a stock gun here, which is still not a terrible gun. It's a 75mm gun. This is essentially, well, not essentially, this is the gun from the Stug 3G at Tier 5 on the other TD line. And this is a gun that you can use, although I don't think it's really considered viable anymore, on the Jagdpanzer 4 at Tier 6. You can use it, but you don't really want to be using it any longer than you have to. You then have the L56. This is the gun that the Jagdpanzer 4 uses. And while it's certainly not a bad gun, it's not really the gun that this machine is all about. But either of these guns make for perfectly good grinding guns. The gun that this machine is all about is the historical L71. So let's just put the other two guns to bed for now, because you're only going to be using those to grind out this baby with. And just out of curiosity, if you haven't played the other German TD line, by the way, you won't have these guns already unlocked. So in terms of XP, you are looking at 9,500 experience for the L56, and then another 16,500 experience for the L71. So in total, you're looking at around about 25,000 XP. So the L71, what is it you're getting? It's an 88mm gun, 9.5 rounds per minute rate of fire, which corresponds to a reload time of around about, well, just shade under 6 seconds without any real equipment, which is pretty good. Sorry, a shade over 6 seconds, my apologies, without any equipment fitted, which is pretty good. That's not bad, depending on the alpha damage. 203mm of penetration with your regular armor-piercing rounds, which is, off the top of my head, I think the highest penetration of any Tier 6 tank destroyer. Bear in mind I haven't played the Swedish yet. Maybe that one has slightly higher, I don't know. But 203 pen is very, very good. 240 alpha damage, it's not the highest alpha damage at Tier 6 on the TD by any means, but it means this gun packs a decent punch. 0.32 dispersion at 100 meters is, I think, the best or the joint best of any Tier 6 tank destroyer. Just out of curiosity, the only machine I can think of that would come close is the AT8. And what do you get on the 17 pounder? You get the same 0.32. So it's a very, very good fully aimed accuracy. Aiming time of 1.9 seconds, which is also good. Not as good as the Jagdpanzer 4, but still pretty good overall. Now bear in mind, of course, your soft stats on the gun are not necessarily going to be fantastic. This is a tank destroyer. You do not get a fully rotating turret, and so moving the hull is going to bloom your aiming reticule out fairly considerably. But the aiming stats on this gun are fairly good, with excellent accuracy, excellent penetration, and good alpha damage. If we have a quick look at the HE rounds, there we've got 44 penetration and 295 alpha damage, which is not fantastic, but it's okay. Situationally, it might be useful against lightly armoured targets, and you've got a good enough reload time that you can switch to those rounds without having too much to be afraid of about getting caught out with the wrong shell type loaded. If we have a look at the premium ammunition, the APCR rounds, honestly they're a bit of a letdown. You only get 237mm of penetration, and I'm saying only, not because that's bad, but because in the grand scheme of things that's not a huge upgrade over the regular armor piercing rounds. It's an upgrade of around about 15%, which Yeah, sure, fine, whatever. But given the cost of those rounds and the high penetration of your armor-piercing rounds anyway, honestly, you don't have any real need for the APCR, which I guess, in a way, is a good thing. So, the gun is damn good. The grind overall on the tank, what is it that we're looking at? Well, if you haven't played, if this is the first German Tier 6 you get to, you'll have the guns that I've already mentioned. The top radio is available on a whole bunch of different machines, and you can already have it unlocked from the Marder 2 onwards. So you have the top radio. The signal range on this tank, 550 meters. It's not fantastic, but honestly, radios, who really cares? I've never noticed a situation in which that has ever been a problem, so don't worry too much about that. The middle engine here, the stock engine with its horsepower of 250 is pretty underwhelming. The middle engine here, 272 horsepower, still not great. Top engine here, 300. Trust me, this thing is never going to go like a rocket, but if you've not played the Hummel before, the Tier 6 artillery piece, you won't have these engines unlocked. And you will want to unlock them just to try and squeeze a little bit more horsepower out of this thing and a bit more mobility. And of course, the suspension you won't already have unlocked. But honestly, the stock gun and the next gun up on this machine are both usable. They're not terrible. So the grind on this tank is not awful, okay? I mean, obviously, if you've played other German tanks beforehand and you've already got some of those modules unlocked, then that will ease your grind. That's always going to be the case. But overall, the grind on this tank is not bad. You can work with it. I've already spoken about the gun. Mobility, well, yeah. You're looking at a 300 horsepower engine on a 24-ton machine, giving you a specific power of 12.38 horsepower per ton, which is not great. Now, the top speed forwards is 40 kilometers an hour, backwards is 15. The reverse speed of 15 is actually pretty good. That forward speed of 40 kilometers an hour is... I mean, it's one of those numbers. You can theoretically reach that speed, and unlike some other tanks, you can get there without having to drive this thing off a cliff. If you just give it a piece of flat ground, the Nashorn will make it up to that speed eventually. But that's the key point. Eventually, it's never going to win any real speed contest, but the mobility is just enough to not make it feel like a horrendous hindrance. It's not the 88 or something. The only time when you really notice the poor mobility is if you're trying to go uphill. Then the lack of engine power does kind of bite you on the bum. We're going to talk about this a little bit later on, but the 600 hit points is okay for a Tier 6 tank destroyer. If we compare it with the Jagdpanzer 4, it is the same. But the armour, 30, 20, 20, we'll talk about this in a moment a bit more, but essentially it's cheese. You will get penetrated by anything that so much as looks at you. So this is a tank destroyer that very much relies on its sneakiness. Speaking of which, camouflage values, which are not bad. It's not the stealthiest machine in the game, but it's good enough to be getting on with. View range of 360 meters. Again, it's not actually that bad in the grand scheme of things. There are tank destroyers with a much worse view range. It's an open-topped machine, so it tends to get a slight buff to its view range. If we compare it again to the Jagdpanzer 4, that's a much lower profile machine, and that gets 350. If we actually just go back to the camo, for instance, the Jagdpanzer 4 is a very sneaky machine, so let's just have a look at what we've got. Concealment when stationary, 19.9, and concealment when moving is 11.9, and then the other values are after firing. Yeah. It's not as stealthy as the Jagdpanzer 4, the flat panzer, but bear in mind camo is quite closely linked to the height of the vehicle, and it's a much higher vehicle, so that shouldn't come as a massive surprise. As I was saying about the camo, it's good enough most of the time, but it's not something you're ever going to be really writing home about. But it's really your only defense. This is a glass cannon. So, I mean, this is very much a traditional sneaky, snipey tank destroyer. You park up somewhere with some concealment, go pew pew pew. When the bad guys have gone away, you relocate somewhere, find some more bad guys to shoot. Again, with concealment, using the camouflage mechanics, pew pew pew, rinse and repeat. It's that sort of gameplay. And just to quickly go back to the gun, I mentioned that it's a good gun. I would say, overall, on balance, it is probably the best gun to be found on a Tier 6 tank destroyer. The 122mm gun on the SU-100, sure, it has higher alpha damage, it hits harder, fine. The Jagdpanzer IV has better DPM, although the DPM on the Nashorn's gun is still good. You know, but it's the joint most accurate gun on a Tier 6 TD, and it's got good aiming stats, and it has, I think, one of the highest penetrations. Thinking about it, the 90mm gun on the ARL-44 actually has higher penetration. And the 240 alpha damage means it actually does an appreciable amount of damage, whereas, for example, the 88 17-pounder can feel a bit weedy at times. And ditto for the Achilles, that 150 alpha damage can feel a little bit on the low side, but 240 feels meaty enough. So this is overall, I think, a very, very good gun. Crew skills, equipment, and all of that jazz. Well, crew skills, I think, are pretty straightforward. This is assuming that this is just a crew, of course, for this tank. Commander wants 6th sense and everyone else wants camo. Nice and simple. You don't want to get spotted if you can possibly avoid it. Honestly, most of the time, if you get tracked or something and get into a situation where you'd want that repair skill, usually you have your repair kit to get you out of that. If you're in a situation where you're having to rely on that more than the once, this thing is so poorly armoured, there's a very good chance that if you're relying on your repair skill, you're already dead, you just don't know it. So repairs really are your friend. If you retrain for gold, sure, you could train your commander up in camouflage. Sorry, I meant camouflage is really your friend. If you retrain your crew for gold, sure, you could start off your commander with camouflage, and then when he hits 100% swap to 6th sense. But if you're like me and you retrain for credits, I wouldn't really recommend that, because you end up losing some XP when you retrain the commander's skill, and so it takes you a bit longer to reach that all-important 6th sense. And because this is such a lightly armoured machine, 6th sense really would help it out. Now you can see my commander here is actually at 85% on 6th sense, so I've never had the benefit of that perk while driving this machine, and I really wish that I had. It would have been very, very useful indeed. Equipment, I don't really think there's too much to argue about here, if I'm honest. It's an open-topped machine, so you can't use vents, so that's something to bear in mind. A gun rammer is always good. 10% to DPM is 10% to DPM. You want to get that reload time down as best as you can. Aside from that, toolbox, not really useful. Enhanced gun laying drive, honestly, not that helpful. You've got a good aim time anyway. And I don't think you really notice that much difference. Coated optics, I mean, you could use coated optics. I don't personally think that the Nashorn's view range is quite high enough to make coated optics a good choice. And because of the style of the machine, you're going to spend a lot of your time sitting still anyway. So I would recommend binocular telescopes and then a camouflage net to try and make you that little bit sneakier. So I would recommend that for your equipment. Consumables, I've got your standard 3, first aid kit, repair kit, manual fire extinguisher. I don't actually remember ever using the fire extinguisher on this thing. Usually if you're getting shot at, there's a very good chance you're going to die anyway. So while I would recommend the small first aid kit and the small repair kit, the fire extinguisher, you could, if you wanted to, probably swap it out for something like chocolate to try and get a little bit more out of your crew. Flitting back to the ammunition just for a moment, I mentioned that the APCR ammo isn't a massive upgrade over the AP ammo, and actually you can see with my loadout, I don't take any APCR whatsoever. I just have armor piercing and high explosive, and I think that's a perfectly viable choice on this tank. You don't need APCR. I mean, if you think back to the Jagdpanzer IV, I have some APCR on that machine, but the APCR bumps the penetration on the gun up to 171, which is still lower, much lower than the regular armor piercing penetration on the Nashorn. So I don't really think you need the APCR. I think you're perfectly fine with armor piercing and HE alone, and it's an economical way of running the machine. So they would be my recommendations. Last thing to mention before we look at things like armor and whatnot, gun depression and elevation. The elevation, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's perfectly sufficient. I could probably look it up. Gun elevation is 20 degrees. Gun depression is 5 degrees, which isn't fantastic, but it's just about good enough where it doesn't feel like a massive hindrance all the time. Okay, it's not as if going over the smallest bump is going to make your gun go flying everywhere. And you can see, just to stick on the gun for a moment, that with my setup, so my crew, which are okay but not fantastic, and a gun rammer, my reload on this gun is 5.4 seconds. And just for the sake of comparison, if we look at the same thing on my Jagdpanzer IV crew with a comparable crew, the reload is 4.7 with that tank. So yeah, the reload on this gun is pretty good, bearing in mind it has a little bit of the alpha damage advantage over the flat Panzer. So yeah, with my setup, this thing is pumping out almost 2700 DPM, which is pretty painful. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to say, so without further ado, we'll have a look at things like module locations, armor profile, and of course I will show you some gameplay. So we'll have a look at some of the module locations on the Nashorn. This isn't really a massively important thing with the tank because it's so lightly armoured, people usually just point in its vague general direction and do damage, but just in case anyone is interested, you've got your driver sitting here where there's that blue section on the tank. There's apparently a bit of fuel tank or something you can hit from the front here. If we just move along, then from the side profile, you've got, oh no, it's the engine in the front. Frontal engine. I was not actually aware of that. So you got frontal engine on this thing. So your engine can get knocked out from shots to the front, though and occasionally, actually thinking about it, that does rear its ugly head and can be a problem. Fuel tanks in the rear of the tank. Commander, gunner from the left hand side, and an ammo rack also in this big fat section that people can, if they wish to, quite easily put high explosive rounds through, and that will really mess your day. From the rear, you've just really got the fuel tank to worry about. From the other side, another couple of crew members. Again, you're going to have your loader up there, your commander, your gunner. Ammo rack round here, it's surprisingly symmetrical. Fuel tank toward the back, engine toward the front, and from above, well frankly, if artillery is going to be aiming at you, you're screwed. This thing does not take artillery at all. So, just to show you some of the module locations for the sake of, I guess, completionistness. That wasn't even a word. But I don't think you'll really find that very useful. So, on with the armor profile. Yeah, another thing that's not really going to be very useful to you. I could have just shown a block of cheese here, and that would have had the same effect. So, let's just get this out of the way initially. The single thickest part of armor on the Nashorn is down here at the front, just here, and it's 35mm thick. That is as thick as it gets. You could penetrate that with a lot of HE rounds. 15, 10, 15, 10. Let's have a look at the side. 20, 10, and the rear, 10, 20. Really doesn't matter whether you're shooting at the front, side, rear of this thing. You will penetrate, unless you're really unlucky and just blow his tracks off at something. Armour, this tank has none. Do not get yourself into the habit of getting shot at all. Avoid it at all costs. Gameplay time. Okay, here we go then. As many of you will be unsurprised to hear, gonna do the same as usual. We're gonna have a top tier game and a bottom tier game. So this is our top tier game, tier 6 game therefore, obviously. It's an encounter game on the Siegfried line. In fact, I think both of these games are on the Siegfried line. When I was playing to get these replays, I guess I just got the Siegfried line a lot. Anyway, go figure. So, top tier. On the one hand, that means we can take a couple of hits before dying. On the other hand, you still don't want to because it will still make you a very unhappy bunny. Your 240 alpha damage does feel quite meaty at tier 6 though. Tier 5 medium tanks die in 2 hits, most of them. You know, tier 6 medium tanks tend to die in about 3 hits. Maybe 4, depending. You know, things like that. And you've got a good enough reload and good enough accuracy and penetration on this gun that those hits are usually money makers. So, yeah. What are we going to have here then? Well, we're trying to keep a little bit of a distance away from the main hubbub of people because we are still made of tissue paper and wishful thinking at the end of the day, and just checking around for some different possible targets. Can we shoot that Cromwell, for example? Hello, Mr. T-150. There we go. Straight through the front of him. No problem. I've no idea whether that went through his angled upper front plate or the front of his turret. Didn't really matter. His armour not really doing him any good there. Have a bit of a blind shot because why not? Who knows, you might get lucky. Worth a go. So that's one penetrating shot so far. Can we do something about this Cromwell? Well, yeah. Now, partly that was my fault for not really paying attention to exactly where that Skoda was. Partly, Mr. Skoda, in future, don't drive out in front of people who are clearly aiming at someone. Go figure. So that was nothing to do with the tank and everything to do with me being a scrub. T-150 once again, another 2 shots in him, leave him a 1 shot, and there we go. 4 shots into a same tier heavy tank frontally, 4 hits, 4 penetrations, 203 penetration at tier 6 with good accuracy and aiming stats. That's what it looks like. Now, of course, that does not mean that you are going to penetrate every single shot that you take, but it's still nice to have. Now, we have to be a little bit careful here. We're winning 3-1, but that's not a huge lead, and a couple of our teammates are on relatively low health, and if we get too enthusiastic, we could very easily explode, and there you can see the enemy team manages to even it up pretty quickly. And again, our lack of armour, our high fragility means it's not too difficult for the enemy to hurt us. Hello, Mr. Largo. Gonna see if I can have a punt at this guy. There we go. I was actually expecting that shot to track the fellow. Apparently not. Or maybe he used a repair kit. Either way, there we go. We've just hit the 1,000 damage done mark. When you're doing 240 alpha per shot, it's like 4 shots. It doesn't take too long to rack up the damage. And this thing gets a similar gun, but better stats than many a tier 8 medium tank. I was expecting that shot on the Hellcat to penetrate, apparently not. And I'm too slow on the trigger because that Skoda's packing an autoloader. Scoreline is 10-4, so this game is really getting a little bit away from us. But you have so far at least gotten to see what happens when you shoot at the front of tier 6 heavy tanks with this gun. Now, remember I was saying that not every shot you take at someone is going to penetrate. Well, I have absolutely no idea where that shot went. I have no idea what angle that thing managed to find to allow it to bounce, but it found one and it bounced. So bear that in mind. T-34 away in the distance. There goes over half his health, and now this STRV-74 is just going to park in my way. 14-5, and I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get to shoot anyone else this game. Even manage a little bit of assistance damage into the bargain. There we go. Our friendly ELC shoots our Swedish medium tank, but we win the game 15-5 nonetheless. Nice quick one there for you. As I say, mainly in there just to show you what happens when you shoot the front of tier 6 heavy tanks with this gun, but also, again, on that VK, just bear in mind you're not going to penetrate every shot, even with awesome accuracy and hilarious penetration. That's just one of those things. So let's have a quick look at the results for this one. There we go then. I was only 3rd class mastery, but you know, I don't try and fill these games with, these videos with spectacular games. I don't see that as the point of them. I'm more interested in them being games that you could see yourself having in the machine. So 3rd class mastery, fire for effect. We still did considerably more damage than we had health. In fact, over twice as much damage as we had health. Finished 4th on our team behind that pair of Skodas. That Skoda T25 Bolosek. 765 damage with those 6 kills. Good lord, he was kill securing like it's going out of fashion. 1287 damage done. 556 base XP, which is not fantastic, but not too bad. And that's something to bear in mind with TDs in general, of course, because typically you don't want to be the one getting shot at. You want to be the one stealthed up and camoed. It means someone else is going to be spotting for you a lot of the time. 12 shots fired. Actually, in that game, the accuracy of the gun wasn't fantastic. 8 hits, 7 penetrations. Was that more the gun or was that more the gunner? I'll leave that up to you to decide. For that damage count. Actually, most of that damage was from less than 300 meters, which is perhaps a little bit of a surprise, but there we go. A little bit of team damage, wasn't intentional, it's just one of those things that occasionally happens. 3 enemy tanks damaged, 1 of them killed, 56 assistance damage, and even with the fine for that little bit of team damage, 20,000 credit profit. We had a premium account at the time from a mission, but it would have been a 12,500 credit profit even without that, with the standard account. And if you take away the fine for team damage, 15,000 credits with a standard account and 23 for premium, times the XP event on, so we got some experience. Only 4.5 minutes long, that match. But there we go. So that was the top tier game. Let's go and have a look at slightly less favourable matchmaking this time. Here we go then, tier 8 match, although there are only 2 tier 8s per side, and one of those is artillery in each case. So this isn't actually the worst matchmaking out there. If you do find yourself in a proper tier 8 match, then frontally, the tanks you really are going to struggle to penetrate are things like the IS-6. You can see our team's got an example there. The IS-3, maybe things like the KV-4 and KV-5. Basically the Soviets. Other nations' tanks frontally, I guess the Japanese heavies might prove a problem, the tier 8 Japanese heavies. But shouldn't be that much of a big deal overall. Anyway, tier 8 match, we're on the Siegfried line. This is an assault game and we are playing in defense. Coming up over here into a rather boring campy spot, but we're going to see what we can do. We've got a Centurion over there, KV-85, 223 damage into him, and we'll happily try and focus this KV-85. Annoyed that the Hellcat got in the way there, and so I took the shot at the KV-85's turret because I didn't want to hit the Hellcat, and as a result it actually ended up bouncing there, unfortunately. Shot onto the other KV-85, one there into the Dicamax, and it looks like I managed to track this guy there, and thus he is dead. But I did take a hit from someone myself. Don't have Sixth Sense on this crew, of course, so just backing off. I don't really want to get shot if I can possibly avoid it. And coming up again and seeing what we can do. There's that 5 degrees of gun depression, not being particularly impressive. Kinda surprised that shot bounced. I took it early because I thought he was going to back off, but there we go. Our artillery actually ends up nuking that poor KV-85. The other KV-85 apparently thinks he's hard enough. There we go. It's me and this IKV up here. Is it LKV? Whatever. And good night, sweet prince. There's kill number 2. And we've broken the 1,000 damage barrier. So we've got an ARL-44 and the enemy's tier 8 tank over here, the Centurion. Can we get any damage onto these fellas? ARL-44. Ah, come on, gun. I've just been telling everyone how good you are. Don't fail me now. And no, this is a little bit awkward. I'm just being patient. The team's 5-2 up, so I don't see any mad need to go rushing out and try and do something. I have a shot there which ends up being a terrible idea because that would have been a much better shot. Although the gun seems to be failing me at the moment because it's not as if those shots bounced, they just didn't hit the target. That one misses the ARL-44. Some of these are slightly chancy shots, but some of them not so much. That one, however, straight through the front of the ARL's turret. Now, the ARL doesn't have the strongest turret in the world, but even so, it's quite a nice feeling. So, the scoreline is 6-2. I'm kind of getting the impression that I want to move up, because otherwise this game is going to get away from me. The problem, of course, with the Nashorn is that you want to be a little bit circumspect when it comes to moving, because you are so fragile, and if you are too enthusiastic trying to keep up with the match, sometimes you can find that things have just gotten away from you, or your team, and some of your team members are dead. Suddenly you're in a dicey position, you get shot up, you die, and it's all gone horribly wrong. So you do have to be very, very careful in the Nashorn. The irony that it's called a Rhino seems a little bit, yeah, it's not lost on me. I think the original name, the Hornet, was much more fitting personally, but there we go. 9-2. We know there's a Jagdpanther away there in the distance. Just lining up on the map where it looks like he might be. Gonna have a bit of a blind shot because, you never know. Might get lucky. Don't get shot back in return. There's the Jagdpanther. He appears to have backed off behind a thing. Bunker, whatever. I'm not going to manage another shot on him. Centurion's getting the snot kicked out of him. So, can we ninja this kill? Yes, we can. There's kill number 3. There's the GW Tiger P. Oh, no, he's turned. I don't have a shot on him. But I do get shot by the Skoda T40. Now, Skoda T40 gets 220 alpha on that gun, so he can kill me with one more shot with an average damage roll. I roll high into the front of his face for 267. And back off. And I don't actually get shot in return, which is nice. Scoreline is 13-4. We've got this wrapped up. GW Tiger P. Nah, he's dead. Can I possibly do something about this Skoda? He's the last fella left. Come on, gun, don't fail me now. What can you do? C'est la vie. Take a punt at the commander's hatch, which I hit, but don't penetrate because nuts to you. I mean, these are very chancy shots. Don't judge the gun poorly just based on this. And there we go. That's the end of the game with 3 kills in the bag. So let's go and have a look at the post-game stats. So here we go then. That game ended up being enough for first class mastery and fire for effect. I was surprised by the first class mastery, if I'm honest, but hey, I'm not going to argue with it. Although it was a tier 8 game, we didn't actually have much cause to shoot tanks that were higher tier than us, so didn't get to show off the penetration that much, unfortunately. Though generally when we hit our targets, we did penetrate them, and the only shots many of the shots we didn't hit were rather chancy, though in 1 or 2 instances I was surprised that the shot didn't hit its mark. 1,643 damage done, 3 kills, 916 base XP, to come top of our team actually, which I wasn't expecting, and second in our team on damage done, just behind the friendly VK3002. Apparently this wasn't a match in which to be a tier 8 tank. RIS-6 only managed 700 damage, and the enemy Centurion just over 1100, but, you know, I'm not going to complain. It ended up being a decent game for us. 19 shots fired, 12 hits, 9 penetrations. Not really what I've come to expect from this gun, but there we go. 4 total damage of 1,643, most of which, there you can see, over 1,500 of it was from more than 300 meters. Received 2 hits, both of them penetrated, somehow managed not to die. A little bit of assistance damage into the bargain, 6 enemy tanks damaged, 3 of them destroyed. And with a premium account, it was a 26,000 credit profit. With a standard, it would have been 14.5. I mean, it's tier 6. You generally make money without too much difficulty. So that was the gameplay I wanted to show you. Let's nip back to the garage to round things out. Okay, so what are my overall thoughts? Well, while I was playing this tank, I had some pretty appalling teams. And because of my game client failing, my patch 9.15 game client corrupting, I couldn't actually show you the gameplay that I originally wanted to. And I can't show you my ace tanker game either. But if we go back and have a look at my stats, I eventually managed a 49% win rate in this thing, which, well, at one point it was looking like I'd struggle to make it over 40%. Teams were absolutely horrendous. 2.26 damage ratio, about 1,000 damage per game, an average, which is not too bad for a tier 6 TD. Overall, okay, so this is not a style of tank destroyer I particularly enjoy. The just sitting behind some camouflage, pew-pewing at people, not really my thing. Having said that, playing this thing was nowhere near as painful as I was expecting. I did actually enjoy playing it. And overall, I think that it's certainly not a bad tank destroyer. As far as fixed casemate tank destroyers go, I don't think it's as good as the Hellcat or the Jackson. I think those two are still the cream of the crop when it comes to tier 6 TDs, despite the Nashorn having a more powerful gun. I just think the added flexibility from the turret is really and the 10 degrees of gun depression and a little bit of armor on the turret. It's really a combination that makes those machines rather strong. Having said that, this is by no means a bad tank, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I did its predecessor, the PZSFL. I found this tank, the Nashorn at tier 6, to be a lot more fun. Not really looking forward to the Stura Emil at tier 7. I've heard some pretty dreadful things about that tank. So yeah, overall my opinion of this machine, if you... let's start again. My overall opinion of this machine is that it's not bad. It's not as bad as I was expecting. It's much better than I was expecting. I enjoyed it more than I was expecting. But I'm still not keeping it. It's just not really my thing. If I want to go and play a tier 6 German TD, I will play the Jagdpanzer 4. But I appreciate that's not most people's preference. And I think most people will enjoy the greater stopping power that this gun has in terms of accuracy, shell velocity, which is very good, penetration. I think most people will find the Nashorn a more comfortable play than the Jagdpanzer 4. The Jagdpanzer 4, I think you have to mix your gameplay up just that little bit more. So for me personally, I prefer the Jagdpanzer. I think most people will prefer the Nashorn, and that's fine. I mean, it's just two different styles, two different approaches to the whole tier 6 tank destroyer thing. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that review, possibly found it vaguely interesting, informative, whatever. If you did, by all means feel free to catch out some of my other videos, maybe the Marder and the Panzer Soufflé videos if you're looking at this tank destroyer line. This is obviously the highest I've made it in this TD line so far, so I can't show you gameplay of the Stura Emil, for example, because I ain't played it yet. But either way, catch some of my other videos, subscribe to the channel if you want to, and I will catch you in another video. Ciao, ciao.